All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of our still unnamed webcast. We're working on it. We got to get a name together. Where we explore the intersection of humanity, technology, and product development. So I am super excited to do our second webcast with Amit Akar. We talked a little bit before about AI and innovation, and today we'll be diving deep into creating Rockstar Product Teams. So, why don't we start? You want to introduce yourself again? Let us know about your background.
All right, nice to be back, AJ. Hi to everyone who's watching. Yeah, my name's Ahmed. I've been building products for the past 30 years now. Started as a software engineer, went into product development, and then moved into product management and consulting over the past 10, 15 years or so. I worked with Google, McKinsey, with AWS, where I met AJ, advising customers on building product teams in their product organizations. And that's the topic today.
Yeah, I love it. Uh, Tell me about your shift a little bit before we get started from software engineering to the product side, because I think a lot of us also came from that background.
So, so my shift was when I was doing research at the university um, on um, what was it back then? Multimedia communications. There was a conference series called the ACM. So I toured with them to Berkeley, to France, a couple of other places, um, and I realized when I get into writing code, I just time just flies by, which is good on the one hand, but then bad on the other hand because there were days that I didn't leave the house, which was not a very healthy
Mhm.
lifestyle. So, and I was missing the human interaction to some extent. So I moved more into multidisciplinary product teams than just writing code, and
Mhm.
then from there slowly shifted towards product management because turned out that's something that I can do well, communicating across disciplines. So
Mhm.
that was more of an organic shift, really. It wasn't anything that I planned.
Mhm. Interesting. I think I found my path to product management the same way. I used to be hands-on engineer, and then, I distinctly remember working through early days of Facebook integration, and after 200 hours of banging my head on the wall, I got it working. I stood up and I realized I haven't seen anybody in a week. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. I gotta get out of there. But no, it's awesome. I hear that story from a lot of people. So, let's talk a little bit about what even are we referring to in terms of a product team, and what kinds of product teams have you seen over the course of your career in different places?
Lots of different kinds. Where to begin? In recent years, I've been mostly advising product organizations, so product leads or head of products that have multiple teams. And there was everything from feature factories straight out of Marty Kagan to full-fledged autonomous product teams that you see in a lot of startups and tech companies, and pretty much anything in between in different constellations. I have to say though, I mostly worked with product teams that build software,
Mm-hmm.
um, or at least like integrated systems. I haven't really worked with product teams that build more complex products that have hardware components, software
Mm-hmm.
components, other systems, integrated logistics. So most of the systems that they were building were comparatively simple. Not that software is simple, but so I haven't seen the full range. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've also not really been in manufacturing or construction products or anything like that.
Yeah, I would imagine to us with so much experience around software development, it's easy to say like, oh, this is not as complicated as all the other stuff. But that's probably because we've seen it so frequently and the challenges that they're facing. So probably there's more credit than credit is due on that. But you mentioned the teams that are just able to go and do the work, operate independently, build out the software that they're looking to build out. So yeah, let's talk about what it even means. You always hear the term cross-functional teams, right? You have to have your product team
Right.
able to, have people from all of the different backgrounds and divisions in the organizations. But I think less frequently do we hear what a cross-functional team actually looks like and the expectations for them. So let's get into what is a cross-functional team? Why does that matter? What do they need to possess?
So first off, I think we're sort of overcomplicating things a bit, because product teams and even like cross-disciplinary or cross-functional teams have been around for at least 5,000 years. Like if you think back about something like the pyramids and how they've been built and the kind of different specialties involved, you probably had a project manager there, a lead architect
Mhm.
or lead priest, whatever they were called, who was managing different stakeholders, right? Um, so, and there's other examples going back in history, um, on different products where the complexity for the time uh, was quite high. Like looking back,
Mhm.
obviously we can say, oh, this is with our technology and knowledge today, it's not a big thing. But um, if you look at something like Hippocrates bench, for instance, that they used back in the 400 BC to fix fractures and dislocated shoulders and so on. That was a feat of engineering back then, where
Mhm.
doctors had to work with the craftsmen, with the metal workers, with the engineers, and they all had their own specialties. And it was a product that Hippocrates and his school actually advertised to other doctors
Mhm.
throughout the Greek and Roman empires. So um, you find the same complexities and challenges, I think, throughout history. It's not really
Mhm.
something new. So basically, whatever the product needs in specialized skills and knowledge, coming together to work towards creation of the product, I would call a cross disciplinary or cross functional team. And I think they all have the same challenges, like throughout history. Making sure that these disciplines can actually talk to each other and collaborate
Mhm.
together, making sure there's a common vision in place that they work towards, um, making sure that knowledge does not stay in silos and that they can communicate well together. So
Mhm.
those are age-old challenges. I'm pretty sure they had similar challenges back a couple of thousand years ago.
Yeah. That's interesting because you would think that with our ability to accelerate communication and the feedback loops and the technology and tools that we would have to share knowledge and disseminate the learnings from research that are being conducted or even engagements or projects that are being completed, you would think that a lot of these problems would be solved, yet we see it again and again and again in different organizations, in different companies, and even within teams. And
True, and I,
yeah,
uh,
go on.
I mean, you see the same problems and challenges over and over again. Like if you asked what the top 5 challenges of product teams are, or what best practices lead to product teams, I think you probably come up with patterns that are pretty similar across industries and throughout time as well. Um,
Mhm.
I think one reason for that is because there's actually not intentional effort spent on building a good product team or thinking about what the product needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what are the efforts that product leaders and managers can put into place to facilitate a better product team? What does a better product team even look like as compared to a not Rockstar product team?
So I think first, the people who are on a team like that need to acknowledge that there will be communication problems between them simply because of their specializations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I was in engineering, I had no idea what the designers were talking about, like zip, or the business people. Like, why are you
Mm-hmm.
bothering me with some financial projections? Like, I wanna code here. Um, then going to the other side, it sort of started making sense, right? But simply the differences in terminology, or even using the same terms in different ways. I mean, that's a given, right? You have that in any larger project. Where different disciplines come together, you'll find that. But it's funny how much how many misunderstandings and how many problems still arise from that. Like, you'd think after 5 to 10 years in the business, people simply out of sheer experience would realize that and would have this,
Mm-hmm.
front and center. But that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
um, you always come across discussions where, as an bystander, it's pretty blatantly obvious that people are simply talking across and
Mm-hmm.
miscommunicating.
Mm-hmm.
um, so a good product team, typically they'll have some time to gel. You'll find that in small focused startups, or also in corporates where people have worked together in the past, so they already know the differences between the different departments. They know the people. So a team where people know each other already,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's can be a good start to solve the communication problem.
Mm-hmm.
You want me to list the rest off, or how do we want to do
Sure.
this?
Sure. Sure.
All
Yeah, I
right.
mean,
So
look, real quick, we could touch on the misunderstanding piece, because I see it all the time. I mean, I think one of the first things that I do landing into a new product team is first going, individually or per discipline and just listening to what they're telling me and identifying where the gaps exist in working together.
yeah,
And, as I think about it, there's been this big trend over the years, and I think now we've pulled back away from it a little bit, but there's, focusing on agile. You get agile coaches, scrum masters, right? You
oh
got to
no,
get people to facilitate. And, that was really big. And then, I think things may have gone sideways a little bit, but I always viewed those people as being responsible to pull all of the threads together, right? They were
yeah,
the ones who needed enough knowledge in each discipline to be able to translate the language,
yeah.
right? So
I
you can
think
say,
that
I get what you're talking about.
I think that was a misconception of what is needed, from the get-go. Like a good product team doesn't need an agile coach. They don't need a
Hmm.
project manager. They don't need a lead. I think the mistake people make is still in looking at this from like a control and coordination perspective, um, like a military squad that needs
Hmm.
like a fire squad that needs a team lead, or a rowing boat that has the guy, you know, giving commands. Like, those are
Hmm.
typically sort of um, parallels or comparisons that are drawn. But a good product team is more like a jazz band. Like, you don't,
Hmm.
if you have a jazz ensemble of like 4, 5, 6 people, they're just jamming. Like, there's There's no conductor there, why the hell would you need that? Because they all have their specialty. They're listening to the other person, trying to figure out
Yeah.
what they're going for, and then they're trying to groove with that.
Hmm.
Why would you need a project manager? Why would you need someone who has to handpick and put the ensemble together? No, it's musicians, professionals coming together. They're all great at what they do. They choose to play together and improvise in that way.
Hmm.
So I think a good product team is like a small jazz ensemble.
Hmm.
You don't have a leader um, throughout. Someone always takes the lead and then passes it on to someone else. You don't need a project manager or an agile coach in a
Hmm.
setting like that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense when you get people who come in with a growth mindset, willingness to learn, willingness to communicate with each other, right? And that's a characteristic that is you have to proactively choose to exhibit that behavior, and you have to continue to
Yeah,
build that muscle memory. I think, to me, seeing immature product teams versus mature product teams is what are the number of people who have that mentality that they're actually going to collaborate, coordinate, and ensure that the right messaging is getting back and forth from teammate to
yeah.
teammate.
And
But
I think it's deeper than collaboration. It's really integration of diverse knowledge. It's synthesizing the insights from different disciplines. That is what
mhm,
makes something new. That is what makes something great. And
mhm,
if you're just trying to match the timing and you hear the tune from one and then you're responding to it, if that's all you're doing, the music will still sound fine, but it's not going to be a great jazz performance.
mhm,
Similarly, in product, if all you're doing is listening to the designer say, well, I'm exaggerating here, but like, let's put the button here. All right, whatever,
mhm,
I'll trust you. If that's all you're doing, you're not getting the benefit of having a designer on board. Why not just use an
mhm,
AI tool or just use, a UI toolkit or something like that? No, I think actually integrating what you know with the perspective of the other person, that's what then turns the team great.
mhm. So how do you foster that type of mentality and culture within your teams and environment?
um yeah, that's a loaded question.
Yeah,
Because you already
that's
know
like the silver
most.
bullet, right? That's everybody's
Yeah,
asking. How do we get people like this?
so again, I think that's an age-old challenge, like the drawing insights from different disciplines field. You go back to something like the Gutenberg press. You had goldsmiths, typesetters, printers, craftsmen that made wine presses. You have all of them coming together, and you have one person pulling this together into like one vision, drawing insights from those different fields. Um, but at the same time, like, Gutenberg was not the only guy having printing presses. There were hundreds across
Hmm.
Europe. Um, so how do you actually you know pull them together and create that environment? I think it really starts with having a good product vision in place. I think that's also the reason why at Amazon there's so much focus on PR FAQs.
Hmm.
Because a lot of product teams, like, you separate them in different rooms. You ask the individual members, what are you building? Like, if you have 5 members, you'll get 8 answers. Like, there's
Hmm.
no real clarity. um, and I think that's to some extent because most the way most of these things are built are project organized in projects. They're stakeholder driven, and people sort of gloss over the cultural and work style differences of the different team members, the disciplinary differences, and on top of that, there's no real decision making power.
Hmm.
And you still have the project complexity of building a product. So there's a lot of hindrances simply because it's already in an existing environment that has these legacy structures and work practices. That's why there's so much focus in the past 5 to 6 years on digital transformation, which isn't really about the digital part, right? It's more about the ways of working and culture part. I think by now, I think it's easier to just start a new organization. That's difficult enough, but
I feel like we see that a lot.
yeah,
I'm not sure the last time I've walked into organization that didn't have some sort of shadow innovation or digital team running in parallel with the primary groups and product teams.
Yeah, I think to some extent they're trying to remove people from the broader organization, or they remove themselves a little bit, encapsulate the product team. Because a lot of the like scope creep and feature bloat typically comes from stakeholders or other departments that are trying to shove their requirements into the team. On top of that, you have technical debt that's still in place. Like, let's say you want to create a registration or onboarding in your software product, and the company insists on using the existing thing because it's already there, it's paid for, right? But with that comes technical debt and system complexity that you weren't accounting for in your product vision, like that you actually don't need, but you can't circumvent that. You have skill gaps and training gaps, not just within the product team, but around the product team. So a lot of time is spent by the team on educating other teams or product teams. And that's why, people say, oh, as a product manager, stakeholder management is, one of your big tasks. Well, actually, no, screw that. Like, it's not my job to manage stakeholders. My job is to manage the product. Otherwise, I would be called stakeholder manager. But that's still, it's a huge part of a product manager's role these days, simply because you have to deal with other functions that are not building products, so they don't understand your challenges.
Yeah. So let's go back real quick. You mentioned the product vision, and then you mentioned the PR FAQ, which you and I know because we both came from
All right.
Amazon. But
Sorry.
yeah, like describe the PR FAQ real quick, and we could talk about that. And
okay. So technical term is a product requirements document. So Google has them, Microsoft has them, a lot of tech companies have them. They all have their own different variations and takes on how to do this. At Amazon, we use what is called the press release and FAQ document. So you can look at this as two sets of documents or a bundle, but basically it's one page where you describe the product vision as if it is already realized. So you're writing from the future, and depending on how far ahead you are in the future, 1 year in the future or 3 years in the future, that sort of gives the reader an idea on how ambitious the project is, or how much technological development the product will need. And then the FAQs give you the details about the product, things customers would ask, like, oh, when is this going to launch in my region? How are you pricing it? And things that internal stakeholders would ask, like, what is the first thing that we're actually building, and how much is this going to cost us, and when do you expect revenue to come in? So that vision is basically the North Star for the product team, and it is something that the product manager owns. So I hope that was a good dictionary definition of that.
yeah, I think that's great. And I love it because unlike PRDs that I've seen before that just start listing out requirements, as a customer, I do this, as a user, I need that. It flips it on its head and it treats it as if you were being asked the question. How do I do this? Right? What are the features, like you said? And then you're forced to think through and explain that. Uh, and then that feeds right into what are you building? How are you training people? What the transformation is? You know, on top of that, that vision document, you mentioned teams being able to make decisions, but they
Yeah.
can't because stakeholders are always coming in with their requirements. So, I really think having a clear vision enables teams to make decisions at a ground floor because the guardrails, right? You have to complete a, you know, experience or part of the journey, but how it gets done is up to the team.
Yeah.
And now you know where you can pivot. So you could say, like, yeah, we've achieved your end goal in this way.
So the reason I also like the PRFAQ over some of the others that I've seen is it actually gives you a vision. A lot of other documents, formats, and approaches that I've seen, they simply describe the product, but that's not a vision. A vision for me is where do you want to be? Like, what is the
Mhm.
outcome that you see? And it's not going to show you how to create that picture, but it will give you that picture in detail. So, and there's great examples in history on this, right? That any product manager should go and study. Like if you look at the Apollo mission,
Mhm.
by the end of this decade, we will put a man on the moon and bring them back safely. Like that is super clear,
Mhm.
right? And if you go into the details of that vision, it's very clear to everyone at NASA and everyone else who's involved, what the outcome should be. There's going
Yeah.
to be an American flag. There's going to be pictures like you can literally see it in front of your mind's eye. Now, how do you get there? That's a different question.
Mhm.
If you tell the product team all the steps they need to take to get there, we still wouldn't have landed anyone on the moon. Um,
Mhm.
so they need a lot of flexibility to explore and discover, because there's going to be a lot of outside requirements coming in on the product team on their vision anyway.
Mhm.
Like one of the things that people keep telling me, especially because I work with a lot of financial services customers, oh, we're so regulated. Well,
Mhm.
imagine
Mhm.
the regulation that goes into like a NASA project. Not only are you shooting stuff up, you need to make sure that what comes down doesn't come down on a friendly nation, or to a not so friendly nation, and then is used by them, or triggers an incident, and that gets you a war that you didn't want. Like
Mhm.
there are some pretty heavy regulations there, and that's also not something new. Like you go back 5,000 years, you look into Hammurabi's code, there's building codes specified there. And what happens if the constructor breaks those building codes and the building collapses on the owner? Then
Mhm.
that constructor is also put to death. Like that, that regulation there was very specific on that issue. Um, so, and if you just strangle the product team with regulations like this by telling them what to do,
Mhm.
you don't get good outcomes. Instead, what you can say is, hey, here's the frame that you can move within.
Mhm.
Find ways not to break things,
Yeah.
but then just let them explore. But that's not the case that I've seen. Like I know companies where the product team has to go through 3, 4 instances of governance to approve an experiment with users. And I'm talking like A/B experimentation on a beta app that's not been released. That's just
Mhm.
insane.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I love the example because we faced it a lot. Finance, healthcare, life sciences, large companies that have big brands that don't want to risk something less than perfect going out. And I feel like it comes back to the discussion about having that cross functional, cross discipline team because a lot of times you'll have this product team who then gets told, oh, we have regulations, and that's it, right? They're not what the regulations are, what it covers, specifically how to work within those boundaries. And there you go. You're basically getting into a cycle of churning out features and product only for that to have to go through an approval process that takes, days, weeks. I mean, I've seen some take months and then come back and say, oh, this is wrong. Or it doesn't go through it at all. And then you end up with even worse outcomes
Oh yeah.
because nobody knew what to look for.
So the best teams that I've seen, and I was lucky to participate in one or two of them, they educated their stakeholders, other functions, to the extent that they became their advisors. So it would be the
Mm-hmm.
product team that actually owns the regulation. And this is really the product manager's job, right? You need to make sure that the thing that you're building is compliant and doesn't break any laws and so on.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't cause any harm. But you're not a lawyer, like you're not a compliance expert.
Yeah.
So you need to get that knowledge from somewhere. The way it usually works in companies is you try to create something and then you give the concept to legal and they say
Mm-hmm.
no, but they don't tell you what your options are or what else to do. It's just do you approve or do you not approve? So it's
Mm-hmm.
becomes a blocker. But the best teams, they manage to turn them into advisors. They
Mm-hmm.
say, I'm going to make sure this is compliant, but you will advise me so that we become compliant. Like you will help me to shape that.
Yeah.
And that works better than trying a guessing game of is this compliant or is that compliant, and it all gets shut down, and then you come into this cycle of never moving forward.
Yeah. I think it goes back to, when we talked about what can organizations do to align themselves to create better product teams. Some of the work that we did at Amazon, and Amazon's concept of a two pizza team, right? The whole team has to
Yeah.
be able to be fed with two pizzas and has to have all of the skills necessary to do the thing to realize the vision, right? So when you take that into consideration, the teams that I saw perform the best is when exactly what you were saying, these external stakeholders were literally part of the team, right? They had expectations. We had one where there was content and legal were part of the team. And I mean, they were showing up to the meetings that we needed to get them on to, facilitate creating new content, understanding regulations, like moving forward. They were part of the sprint. They weren't this like individual or ambiguous group that we're just delivering work to and waiting
Yeah.
for them to get back. Like we made them part of the experience.
Yeah. I think you could look at this like a startup and their board of advisors, their investors. So you need that kind of relationship, because ultimately the decision making should be delegated to the product team.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned two pizza teams, so there's the sense of ownership and autonomy and accountability in the areas of the product, from development to launch and marketing and scaling and so on. But in most places, I would say the majority of places that I've seen don't actually have a formal encapsulated product team like this. So most
Mm-hmm.
people, every role within a quote unquote product team has somewhere between 3 to 5 products that they're managing in projects.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have a release train engineer typically because they're running safe or something similar that tells which team is working on what given product at a given day. And then you have scrum masters and agile coaches and project managers. So I've seen on a team of 3 people, designer, engineer, product manager, which, do you count the product manager in a small team like that? I don't know. But those 3 people had a project manager, an agile coach, and a release
Mm-hmm.
train engineer. Like they were actually overcrowding the actual team.
Yeah.
Um, so that doesn't work, and obviously, um, but it is the norm, I find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think we see that a lot, and that's why I think there's now a little bit of a negative connotation to the agile coach, scrum master dichotomy there. But you see it a lot where the process imposes so much overhead that it becomes difficult
Yeah.
to move forward. And my sense is, going back to the words you just used, the ownership and accountability. This goes back to the characteristics we're talking about that you look for in your teams, right? But because there's so many people, you end up with a culture where people are taking on work, but it's always somebody else's problem, right? Oh, I'm blocked. That's somebody else's problem. Oh, I
Yeah.
need information. That's somebody else's problem. And then the response to that seems to always be, well, let's add on more overhead to solve for these poor behaviors.
So for a lot of teams, it's a structural issue because they have a safe type environment, a safe type organization structure. So for those of you that don't know, which I'm guessing are a minority, SAFE is a scaled agile framework, which is built for enterprises to do agile work, but it's really just a different way of managing waterfall type project work. So it's not it is in fact not very agile, and you can even measure this in a very simple way. Just look at how many iteration a single product goes through in a given time, and then compare that to the number of iterations in a encapsulated product team. So a product team where every member just works on that one thing and doesn't have any other responsibilities. There will be differences by factors of 10 at least. And there's this 10,000 hour rule on mastery. You probably heard of that, right? Goes back to Malcolm Gladwell. Well, it's been debunked 10 years ago and debunked over and over again since, because it turns out it's not the number of hours you put into a skill that make you good. It's the number of iterations. And it's the same with products. The more iterations you put in the different things that you're exploring, the better the result is going to be. So the number of iterations you get mostly in like these safe agile absurdities are maybe 2-3 iterations in a given cycle. So that's what they do in 3 months. If you look at a product team that's actually exploring things, that number will be 30, 40, 50 at least.
Yeah.
And it's simple math. Like the more things you try, one of them is going to stick, even if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, I always get this feeling that you can tell when a product has hit its peak of its maturity curve and has gone into almost zombification if the update on their mobile app is new colors and new icon, fresh look. And like, okay, that is a really, you you could just tell based on my experience seeing the mechanics behind the scenes. There were entire teams in governance that went through choosing that new icon and the new colors. It's okay, you're not experimenting anymore, or at least not as much as you could be.
Yeah, that's the other thing that you'll see in great product teams is the decisions are not made by committee, right? Like the engineer will say, hey, this is the thing that we're going to take. That's the thing that you're going to take. There will be some discussion around how to move forward from that, or whether it really fits the vision and requirements or not. But people, the leads will make those decisions. In most product teams that are not organized in a single team, autonomous team like that, you'll have these decisions and requirements coming from everywhere. So what the outcome will be the best compromise that the team could take, and that's gonna suck. Like that's very simple to see, because there's not going to be a lot of continuous improvement and adaptability. So what you really want to optimize for, if you want to build a great team, is set the conditions so that they can um, run a lot of iterations on different things, on the design, the engineering, the business models,
Mm-hmm.
logistics, whatever component of the product you're looking at. They need to be able to iterate on that on their own quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other thing, by the way. A lot of product teams, especially in larger organizations that outsource a lot, you see that in pharma companies, for instance, that are not vertically integrated. Um, the product team is just a team of managers. Like you have
Mm-hmm.
the design lead who's not doing any design, the engineering lead who's not doing any code or infrastructure. They're all just managing vendors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's, you're not going to move fast that way, right? It's better to just hand the thing over to the vendors and say, you know what, you guys do it. Like we don't
Mm-hmm.
need to manage you. We'll just talk every once in a while. But instead, what they do is they set up these product teams with the different roles that are all just managing outside parties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I
So you
think
don't want to do that.
yeah, and I
Sorry.
think, one, you have to have trust in the vendors to do that job. But if you haven't even created the structures internally for people to understand what that trust looks like and what good
Yeah.
and great looks like, then how are you going to manage somebody else? You don't know what great looks like. So I could see that really holding it back. And one of the things you mentioned earlier is having product teams who are focused on multiple things simultaneously. And
Yeah.
yeah, we see that a lot too. It's a part of this desire to get the most work out of people possible. So they're spreading
Which is
out.
fine.
Yeah.
That's a legitimate business concern.
Mm-hmm.
But the paradox thing here is you're actually getting less out of people by doing that, because every
Mm-hmm.
new project has, like, if a project has 10% overhead, which is generous, right? Like that's rare. Typically, it's more like
Mm-hmm.
you lose a day with meetings and admin stuff, and so it's more like 20%. But if you have 20% overhead for each project, well, then if you have 5 projects, all you're doing is managing these projects, but you're not really
Mm-hmm.
moving forward on any of those products,
Yeah.
which is really what happens. People are mostly busy firefighting,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously for a lot of product leads that are hearing this, or heads of product who can't really change the organizational structure, just telling them, hey, create some autonomous product teams, that's useless advice. Like they're not going to be able to do that. But one
Yeah.
thing you can do, if you have 4 projects, four products that you're running as projects, well, you could do them sequentially, right? You do
Mm-hmm.
one project in 1 month. You just focus on that thing, and then
Mm-hmm.
second month on the other thing, third month, and so on. So if you have 3 projects, you'll be able to work on all of them in a quarter, and you'll hit your targets. Which, if you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to juggle all of them at the same time, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
So one way of doing that would be talk to your release train engineer or whoever is pushing the work into those teams, and say, look, let's make an arrangement. Let's give this product focus for 2-3 weeks, and then do this one, and then do that one. At least that way, people will be able to
Mm-hmm.
focus on one thing for a given time, and not lose their damn minds trying to juggle everything all at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see, going back to the idea, we're we're trying to solve for the downtime in between things, right? That's why stacking multiple projects, products on top of people's plates. And this also, goes back to the idea of ownership and accountability, right? One of the things that I push people on my teams for, the teams that I'm advising, is when you pick something up, you own the outcome of that thing, right? You
Yeah.
don't get to just say, I'm blocked, it went to legal, and now I have downtime for 6 days. It's like, no, like, did you follow up with legal? Like, where's the meeting? How are you pushing this forward? Why? What have you done to stay attached to it so that you're ensuring the outcome is achieved, right? So if people are able to focus on that one stream of work, the one product, the one thing, but also take ownership of every task that comes that way, you shouldn't have downtime, right? Everybody is constantly in motion.
And typically you don't, like, unless you're in like professional services or consulting where you're sort of in between jobs, and then given the nature of that work, you actually need that downtime, right? So it's not a bad thing. But where have you seen downtime in teams that are managing multiple projects? Like, I've never seen that.
Never.
It doesn't exist.
Never,
So,
because they're all going to 10 meetings a day.
yeah.
Right. I think the better question is, when have we seen high performance outcomes from teams that are managing multiple products?
Correct. So if and the no matter what kind of product team you're looking at and how they're organized, they're still all going to face the same kind of challenges. Like, all teams will have to look at testing and quality assurance. They all have to manage stakeholders. They all have to deal with regulation and compliance. But if you structurally make it even harder for them to perform that, then you're not going to get great outcomes, which is what we're seeing out in the industry. You don't see a whole lot of great outcomes. So a lot of work that I do these days is not just training the product teams, because if frankly, if you just get a few good people and you throw them in a room and lock them in, throw the key away, you'll get good results if that's the only thing they're working on. It's more the overarching organization, the business, the leadership there that needs some advice on how to structure this so that they actually get the outcomes they want. So that's where most of my work goes, not so much into the actual product teams.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that leaders can take away to look at and say, I need to implement X, Y, and Z, or I need to start considering A, B, and C? What are some of those things?
So I would say being ruthless in prioritizing what you want from your organization. I think that's where it should start. Because if a product team has a great vision for their product in place, but the business does not, and the business does not have a good strategy, like, how are they supposed to align their vision to the overarching vision and strategy? So being very clear and very focused there makes a lot of sense. And pretty much every company that I worked with were trying too many different things at the same time. And we're not all Elon Musk, and I'm not sleeping under my desk, and most people don't want to do that. And it's also not necessary, you know? So the reality is you're not going to launch those 10 apps in the year that you wanted. Why not launch 3 that are really good? And then next year you can launch the next 3. But that's not what companies are doing. So there's a lot of busyness and action going on, and leaders could really learn from very focused leadership examples like Jobs and Musk before he started managing like 5 companies at once. Because that is super rare. I've in my 10-15 years in working in product, I've rarely met a leader who was very focused on where they wanted to drive the business. It was always like 10 different things at once. So you can do 10 different things, just not all at once. And I think the challenge is knowing where to take the risk, like which of those 10 things are you going to pick? And chances are you're going to pick the wrong thing. And it's going to go down the drain and you might have to find a new job. But I think both in leadership position and in a product team, making bets like that pays off, because you might not land one for a couple of years, but if you land with a success like that, it's going to go through the roof. In comparison, if you're managing like 4 different products and one of them gets successful, the success will still be mediocre because the product will be mediocre.
Yeah. And I imagine that relates to what you were saying around, is it better to do 30 small experiments or 3 experiments and releases? You have to set up your experiment life cycle to be able to get information early and relate that back to help pivot what your vision is at the end of it. I love the concept of Amazon's 1 and 2-way door decisions, right? You can have a big vision, but if you're doing a really complicated release train, you're doing 3 releases a year, you're not learning fast enough to really navigate where that train is going, and you're not able to make the informed decisions. So that becomes a 1-way door. You step out of it and you've already lost 10 months, versus a 2-way door is, hey, let's do 4 experiments a month. What worked, what didn't work, and let's pivot.
Yeah, and experiments can be done very quickly, very cheaply these days. Like you can build websites, features, different functions in automated ways, or use existing building blocks. The problem is most product teams are working with one hand bound behind their back, because instead of, hey, let's use, I don't know, Trello or just a Word document to list out a few things and experiment with that. No, you have to write in Jira because that's where the project is, and I need to see your Jira ticket because I'm the project manager, and on it goes. It's like you have to deal with that shit instead of actually focusing on your experiments. And there's the problem that I see is what you just outlined. Companies are treating 2-way doors like 1-way doors in all aspects. Like when you're at the early discovery stage of a product, you still have to use a hugely complex product management suite or a ticketing suite like Jira to manage your development and your code. And no, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be using something very simple and quickly accessible. Like later when you scaled and it's a huge mature product, then you can think about, migrating to something like that. But even in the tooling environment, the work processes, in approvals, in everything, companies are treating it like 1-way doors. And that's what they become, because it's a 1-way door. People hesitate in taking that decision. And we all know, especially in software, you hesitate, you're dead. Like, if you build it in 2 years, in 2 years, there's suddenly something like ChatGPT comes along and then changes the whole landscape. You can't plan for 2 years.
Yeah. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Right? You've waited so long that now you have to be all in, because this release has taken $1 million to get out the door.
Yeah.
You can't make a mistake. So then you push it back even further.
Yeah, correct. And the experiments that are run, they are often seen at product level. Like we want to run experiments for version 0.1, whatever, instead of saying, oh, we want to make a UI experiment here, a code experiment here, an infrastructure experiment, a business or logistics experiment. Like you need experimentation across the board, even in compliance, like not just in one thing. And if you, like, one strategy could be, as a product team, by the way, to just bombard your governance with that. Like, you want to be the bottleneck? Fine, here you go. Here are 50 requests. Have fun approving all of those. If you want to signal a change, there's ways of forcing that, if you're not too attached to your job, that is.
Yeah, which is the other risk that we all have to live in, right? When we talked about how can organizations promote a culture like this? If it's not coming from the top down, you're always going to be pushing up, and that puts you at risk as an individual.
The thing that makes a good product team, though, is you often have individuals that don't care about that. Like one of the best product designers I had, he was like, screw this. If they don't like my design, I'll quit tomorrow and find something else the other day. And they can if they're good people.
Yeah.
So you need some opinionated way of pushing against this if the structure is constraining you. And hopefully you have a good product manager who finds creative ways of finding the loopholes.
Yeah. And just to clarify, when you said getting people who don't care about it, it's not that they don't care about the product or the mission, it's that they have an opinion on what's right. And their goal is to get to the end. And all of these ancillary operational things are, a hindrance to getting there.
Yeah.
So we have to get there.
So they care less about their own reputation or what impact it has on their career than they actually care about the product and the customer that's using. So they will fight for their opinion. Often it'll be backed by the data and by the experiments they've run. And if you have a person like that in every role in the product team, you'll have a very strong product team. And it's very hard for stakeholders to push against that because they'll be well prepared and they'll have strong opinions on things.
Yeah, and they should. And stakeholders, we've, even in this conversation, we keep referring to them as this third party of decision makers and things like that. But like, even in the way that we've talked about it, I feel that there's a sense of conflict between the two, right? The stakeholders have to be made happy and the stakeholders come up with requirements, but they should be part of the process as well. Like, this is supposed to be one team.
And this is often not the case. That is why they're referred to as the anonymous stakeholders, right? The ominous group that prevents the team from functioning. But in fact, it's the business leads, it's the support functions that are there to help your product to function in the first place, and making sure that you bring them in, loop them in somehow, or at least make sure they can't disrupt too much. I think that's a hallmark of a good team as well. So you need at least one or two political people in there who have their network, who can influence people, who can gain and gather support for their work. Like, unless you're a startup that is bootstrapped and not don't have to answer to anyone, you always have other people that you need to work with that are not part of your core team, for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're just at time. Any concluding thoughts before we sign off?
So I think to what makes a Rockstar product team, if you can get good, experienced people who are opinionated and who care about the product and the customer, then what remains is really removing the blockers one by one or finding ways around them. Because most of the time, it's not that the team needs to learn how to communicate and collaborate. If they're seasoned professionals, they'll know that already. They don't need any hand-holding. What they'll need is someone to keep all the dysfunctionalities at bay so that they can actually do their work.
Yeah. Awesome. I love it. Well, thank you very much. This has been a great conversation. Our second conversation.
That's right. Thank you, AJ. Yeah. Were there any questions? I haven't actually looked in.
So I did not see any. But yeah, for anybody in the audience, we can't write comments, but if you add comments, we can see them. But I haven't gotten anything yet. So maybe we did a really great job explaining everything. That's what I'm going to go with.
All right. We'll go with that. If there are any comments, people can still post that on LinkedIn, I guess.
Great. All right. Have a great rest of your day, evening. Take care.
You too. Take care, AJ. Bye.